Three Crowns Park is a quiet retirement community in Evanston, Illinois. Inside an apartment in this home, a retired pediatric neurosurgeon named Dr. Norman Guthkelch is sitting at his desk. He's wearing thick black glasses and peering at a computer screen. Guthkelch is 96, but he's still hard at work. He spends his days typing emails and reviewing medical records from court cases in which people stand accused of abusing children. In 1971, he wrote a paper in the British Medical Journal that helped lay the foundation for doctors' understanding of shaken baby syndrome. Now Guthkelch is trying to reverse what he and others believe is the impact his paper has had. In his opinion, and in the opinion of some others, the paper contributed to the body of research on shaken baby syndrome that has played a role in criminal prosecutions. He asks us to hand him a folder from his bookshelf.
This is a case where the man's been in jail for 12 years now, and then here are some CT scans. There's a police photo.
And so someone sent this case to you, and what were they hoping that you would... Were they hoping that you would read it?
What they hope I'm going to do with this one is to show that the child was already very ill from another cause.
Why are you doing all this for free?
Because I think it's my duty, dear. Fancy asking me a question like that.
I'm Nick Costell. Back in May, Guthkelch sent an email to a Northwestern University investigative journalism class supported by the Medill Innocence Project. The project investigates potentially wrongful convictions. I was also a student in the class. I'm joined now by my former classmate.
I'm Katie Brennan. Guthkelch emailed us after hearing word that the Medill Innocence Project had taken a shaken baby syndrome case, which was actually its first. The organization had a policy that it wouldn't take such cases because they aren't like other murder cases the Medill Innocence Project has investigated. They don't often leave witnesses.
According to the U.S. Centers for Disease Control, shaken baby syndrome involves brain injuries that result from violently shaking an infant. It has generally been characterized by bleeding in the brain, bleeding behind the eyes, and brain swelling, commonly known as the triad of symptoms. There's disagreement in the medical and legal communities about shaken baby syndrome, and that disagreement centers on several questions.
Do these symptoms always and only point to shaking? Is the onset of these symptoms immediate, or could they appear days after an infant is injured? If the symptoms do not manifest themselves immediately, is the last person present with the infant responsible for the injuries? And is it even physically possible to produce those injuries through shaking force? And at the center of the debate is Dr. Norman Guthkelch.
In 2008, pediatrician Dr. Carol Jenny introduced Guthkelch at the International Conference of the National Center on Shaken Baby Syndrome. Jenny sits on the organization's board. The National Center on Shaken Baby Syndrome's stated aim is to prevent shaken baby syndrome.
So, who should be credited for discovering shaken baby syndrome? My vote is for Dr. A. Norman Guthkelch.
Jenny declined to comment for this story. In 2002, the National Center on Shaken Baby Syndrome honored Guthkelch with an award for his work. It was his 1971 paper on whiplash injuries and subdural hematomas, on pools of blood between the membranes of the brain, that contributed to the medical understanding of shaken baby syndrome.
Nick and I sat down with him to talk about his life, his career, and why he's speaking out now.
I was born on the outskirts of London in the early days of World War I. As far back in childhood as I can remember, I was the person who found the wounded sparrow and tried to nurse it back to health. For some years, I really was thinking of becoming a vet, but by the time it was probably about second grade, my mother said quite sort of quietly, "Why don't you try and cure people instead?" And I thought that might be a good idea.
Guthkelch studied Latin and Greek in boarding school, but at Oxford, he chose to study medicine.
I must have been the most ignorant medical student there ever was. I seem to remember reading up on the atomic theory. in the vacation after I'd left school before I got to Oxford.
Guthkelch did his residency at the Manchester Royal Infirmary. The doctor he worked under noticed he spent much of his time caring for children. One day, the doctor came to him with a question.
Then he said, "We've never had a pediatric neurosurgeon in this country. Would you like to be the first?" I said, "You bet I would, sir."
Guthkelch began to see children come in with subdural hematomas, with pools of blood or fluid in the brain. And he noticed that some of these children with subdural hematomas had something else in common.
Guthkelch and the social workers he was working with asked parents if they were shaking their child. And with no fear of prosecution, the stories would come out.
I happened to be living in one of the very few places in the world where shaking was regarded as a legitimate punishment, not punishment, a corrective measure. And if I'd been in Russia or whatever, I wouldn't have had that chance.
But Guthkelch observed that this form of discipline, now considered abuse, could cause serious internal injuries.
So you saw that there was this direct correlation,
There was a correlation, yes.
Guthkelch moved to the United States in the late 1970s. Since then, a group of lawyers and doctors has questioned whether some convictions have sent innocent people to prison. Citing new research, this group contends that courts sometimes overlook other medical problems in infants, problems that could cause the same symptoms as shaking, such as seizures. At the forefront of the legal debate is Deborah Turkheimer in Chicago. She's a law professor at DePaul University and a former New York County Assistant District Attorney. She's known Guthkelch for several years.
He's someone who has been held up as the sort of the grandfather of all of this. And so for Dr. Guthkelch to point out that the criminal justice system, the criminal justice system's use of this theory, this hypothesis, is problematic, I think should give people great pause, and should even on the part of people who have been strong believers in the validity of this diagnosis.
Turkheimer wrote an article in 2009 for the Washington University Law Review about shaken baby syndrome. In the article, she argued that courts don't do a good enough job evaluating alleged shaken baby cases. She's writing a book about the ongoing debate in these cases. Guthkelch helped One Innocence Project, the Arizona Justice Project, work to defend a father who was accused of shaking his infant son, shaking that allegedly led to the baby's death. Guthkelch met the project's first executive director, Carol Sperling. Sperling had been working on shaken baby cases since 2002. She knew about Guthkelch's research, but she didn't contact him until she read a letter he wrote to the New York Times Magazine in response to a cover story about shaken baby convictions.
And then it was signed Dr. Guthkelch, Dr. Norman Guthkelch, Tucson, Arizona. And I thought, Tucson, Arizona? Quite frankly, I didn't know that he was even still alive, really.
Sperling had a student look Dr. Guthkelch up online, and after they found him, they wrote to him.
Dear Dr. Guthkelch, I saw your letter to the editor in the Sunday New York Times Magazine last week, and seeing your letter, I was prompted to write you. Let me explain. I'm a volunteer with the Arizona Justice Project.
What she didn't say in the letter was that she was working on the case of Drayton Witt. In 2000, the father was 18 years old when he was accused of shaking his son Stephen. But Sperling and her students believe the court ignored the infant's medical history of reoccurring seizures and other complications.
And so, yeah, I went down thinking that if he were going to be on our side on any case, it would be this case.
Sperling and a student drove to Tucson to meet Guthkelch at his home last year. When he agreed to look at their case, they showed him doctor's reports and radiology slides.
She showed me this case, and I remember saying, I don't know, it was the first time I saw the record, but at one stage I remember saying I wouldn't hang a cat on that evidence.
Guthkelch agreed to let Sperling videotape his deposition.
Do you have an understanding of the way cases have been prosecuted in the United States now where only the triad is enough without other signs of abuse?
I'm beginning to hear about that.
But he didn't talk just about Witt's case. He revealed his feelings about how his research from the 1970s had been used.
Did you foresee that your hypothesis that you had from these two cases would turn into a system of prosecution for the triad only?
Absolutely and utterly not. Frankly, I've been horrified that this paper of mine has turned into the prosecution of a number of individuals who I don't think should have been, what I've read, should have been prosecuted. I'm sorry, excuse me, it is not for a doctor to say should have been prosecuted. May I just rephrase that accurately? In my opinion, there was insufficient medical evidence to be laid before a prosecutor and taken action on.
So let me just see if I can restate this. In cases where a baby comes in and has only a subdural hematoma, retinal hemorrhages, and maybe some edema, would you say that that's not enough to assume criminal abuse on its own?
Yes, I would say that.
Witt's conviction was vacated before Sperling could use the video in court. Now Sperling is waiting to see if the state wants to try the case again.
If so, Sperling plans to use Guthkelch's deposition.
Sperling and Turkheimer have worked with Guthkelch and other doctors to question whether courts have sent innocent people to prison based on incomplete evaluations of children. But other prominent physicians say the process of investigating alleged cases of child abuse is more thorough and more accurate than the other side acknowledges. That's the opinion of Dr. Robert Bloch. He's diagnosed children with shaken baby syndrome and has testified in court as an expert for prosecutors. In 1989, Bloch was named the first chief child abuse examiner for the state of Oklahoma. He left the position in 2007 to become president of the American Academy of Pediatrics. He sits on the advisory board for the National Center on Shaken Baby Syndrome.
When a child comes into medical attention, Nick, what happens is that there's an evaluation of the signs and the symptoms and the medical history and all the factors around that child, social history, developmental history. And then in a case where and that all results in what's called a differential diagnosis. And that differential diagnosis requires us to say and to document, okay, what are all the things I know or can learn about that cause retinal hemorrhages? What are the causes of a subdural hematoma? What are the causes of brain swelling and sudden collapse?
Bloch says doctors on the whole do not leap to the conclusion that a caregiver shook a child.
You can have many causes for retinal hemorrhages, many causes for bleeding in the brain, many causes for brain swelling, but there are very few causes of that all occurring together in a child who's been previously well.
And Bloch says doctors no longer turn to Guthkelch's work when trying to determine if a baby was shaken.
And I agree that Norman has said he's a little concerned about that work being used in convictions, but it's not his work, unfortunately, for that's being used in the convictions. It's the more modern science that has evolved from his work and that has demonstrated causation. And so his credit is for bringing that to the awareness of the health community. I don't think he should accept any kind of criticism for having work that is misused, because as great as his work was as an innovation, it's not the work upon which medical decisions are being used today. And it's not that we're saying, oh, this baby has this sign, Dr. Guthkelch wrote about this some decades ago, so this must be shaken baby. That's just not what happens at all.
Guthkelch says the case of Drayton Witt, the Arizona case, opened his eyes.
I began to realize that and I had no idea of this at the time, sort of imprisoning the parents of shaken babies had become a national pastime, so to speak. And I had no idea of that because I was out of medicine.
When Guthkelch's wife died last year, he moved to an assisted living home in Evanston. Now Guthkelch dedicates his time to reviewing cases. Attorneys reach out to him.
Why are you spending kind of your life, this part of your life since November, looking back at these cases?
Can you think of something better to do? nor can I. What nicer thing than to have the chance to correct the mistake which you never... I don't feel I caused this in any way at all. I think I was, from the beginning, I was misquoted and miss everything else. And I bitterly regret that it's got into this situation. And it appears that I've still got just about enough credibility for people to be listening when I say, for God's sake, stop shouting at one another and look at the facts.
Guthkelch hopes that doctors today will take the time to examine individual cases more thoroughly before reaching a conclusion.
Guthkelch has binders of notes and articles on a table in his apartment. The articles are the ones challenging the debate Guthkelch says he didn't mean to start. Nearby, on top of his bookshelf, he still displays the glass award that the National Center on Shaken Baby Syndrome gave to him 10 years ago. I'm curious, sort of knowing where you stand now on things, why do you keep it up?
Because I want to know the truth. What better reason?
You can find out more about the Medill Innocence Project's research into shaken baby syndrome at www.medillinnocenceproject.org.
The music used in